In the 13th century, Europe did not tremble at the sound of swords or the march of armies. It trembled at a papal decree, a curse upon the most ordinary of creatures. Pope Gregory VI, the supreme voice of Christendom, declared war on cats. Not armies, not kings. Cats. From the marble halls of the Vatican came a command that dripped with superstition and dread. Black cats, he claimed, were not God's creatures at all, but the devil's familiars, agents of witchcraft stalking the shadows of Europe. To keep such animals was to harbor Satan himself. And so, what began as a holy proclamation soon turned into a frenzy of blood and fire. In the years that followed, the night air of Europe would echo not with hymns, but with the howls of dying cats. And behind that silence, something far worse was waiting. In medieval Christendom, the Pope's words were not debate, they were law wrapped in divine fear. His decree echoed from cathedral pulpits, carried by priests whose sermons thunder with warnings. The cat was Satan's servant, a beast of midnight sorcery, to be hunted, tortured, and destroyed. What Gregory unleashed was not simple guidance, it was a weapon. The Church turned suspicion into holy obligation, transforming the act of killing cats into an act of piety. Across Europe, ordinary men and women became executioners, convinced that each slain cat was one less claw for the devil to rake across the earth. The Pope's words became a commandment, and Europe obeyed with fire and iron. Villagers dragged cats from homes, clutching them by the scruff, while the animals hissed and clawed in terror. Their desperate cries pierced the night, a sound that mingled with church bells and sermons, as though heaven itself demanded their suffering. The cobblestones bore scratch marks from paws raking against stone, as if the earth itself recorded their protest. In cities, great pyres were built, not for heretics, but for animals. Bonfires became stages of ritual slaughter. The crowd gathered as cats were bound in wicker baskets or tied by their tails, then thrown into the roaring flames. The animals convulsed, twisting into grotesque shapes as the fire consumed them, their shrieks rising above the hymn of the priests. The air filled with the thick, greasy smoke of burning fur and flesh, clinging to hair, clothes, and skin. For days the smell haunted the towns like the ghost of 1,000 dead. It wasn't only fire. Festivals turned cruelty into entertainment. Cats were stuffed into barrels and rolled down hills, their bones cracking with every bounce while children laughed. Others were tossed from rooftops into waiting crowds, who caught them on pikes or stones. Some villages nailed the animals to doors as wards against evil, their lifeless bodies dangling, dripping onto the earth below. It was not a purge but a blood spectacle, the holy theatre of pain. And the children, they were taught this horror as a lesson. Tiny hands, unshaken by pity, hurled rocks at strays until bones splintered and skulls burst, the cobbles splattered red. Priests told them it was righteous, that every death was a blow against Satan himself. Innocence was molded into cruelty, and entire generations grew up with blood on their fingers. By the time the killings swept through villages, the night grew eerily quiet. No longer did eyes glint from alleyways or rooftops. The soft padding of paws vanished. What replaced it was silence, heavy, suffocating, and unnatural. The guardians of Europe had been slaughtered, leaving behind streets darkened not by cats, but by the smoke of their extermination. When the last embers of cat fur died out on the pyres, something else began to stir in the shadows. Rats, endless, ravenous, and fearless, poured into the streets like a living tide. They bred in walls, in barns, in the straw beneath the beds of sleeping families. By night their claws scratched in unison, a chorus of hunger echoing through the timbers of every house. By day they gnawed openly at sacks of grain, tearing through supplies meant to feed towns through winter, leaving only husks and filth behind. Granaries seethed with them. Lift a wooden lid, and a black wave spilled out, hundreds of slick bodies writhing and squealing, their eyes burning red in the torchlight. In graveyards, They grew bolder, chewing through freshly buried coffins, dragging scraps of flesh into the open soil. The dead did not rest. They were eaten. And when the corpses were gone, the vermin turned to the living. Fleas cascaded off their backs like a plague, in miniature, crawling in carpets, clothing, even bedding. People awoke scratching until their skin bled, red welts forming in clusters that spread across whole families. The itch was unbearable, but worse was the smell, a thick miasma of rot, an animal waste that clung to every corner of town. Streets ran with urine dung, and the metallic stench of gnawed bone. The countryside fared no better. Fields became warrens. Farmers stumbled on nests so large they pulsed like a single living organ. Thousands of rats moving as one mass, squeals so loud they sounded like shrieks of children. Even church altars were not safe candles, burned while rats scurried across the stone, leaving trails of blood from half-chewed offerings of meat and bread. The people had driven out the cats. Their silent guardians, their hunters in the dark. In their place came an army of vermin, swarming, breeding, devouring. It was as though the earth itself had vomited up its filth to punish humanity. The cost of blind faith was not just cruelty. It was infestation. The rats were not alone. Their fur crawled with passengers, tiny, parasitic riders that carried something far worse than gnawed grain or sleepless nights. Fleas, swollen with blood, leapt from rat to human, their bites burning, their bellies bursting with infection. They carried the Black Death, and it spread like fire through dry grass. Where cats once prowled, silent and watchful, the rats now marched openly. And behind them, unseen but unstoppable, came the angel of death. It drifted into cottages, cloisters, and castles alike, whispering into the lungs of peasants and kings. First came the fever, then the swellings, black, fist-sized buboes bulging from armpits and groins, the skin split, oozing pus that stank of decay. Victims coughed blood until their throats tore open, and then came silence. The streets filled with bodies faster than they could be buried. Bells tolled endlessly, each ring announcing another soul claimed by pestilence. Carts groaned under the weight of corpses piled like firewood, arms dangling, jaws frozen mid-scream. In towns, pits were dug so wide and deep that entire families vanished into them. Mother, father, child, all shoveled into the same grave, lime tossed across the heap, as though they were refuse. Priests walked with incense to mask the stench, swinging censers above rivers of rotting flesh, but even the churchmen fell. Monks collapsed mid-prayer, their holy books stained with blood spatters from their own mouths. In villages, children clung to the stiffening bodies of their parents, their own faces already fever, flushed already marked for death. And all the while the rats thrived. They swarmed the very carts that carried the corpses, gnawing at fingers and lips as the wheels rolled toward the grave pits. Europe had slaughtered its cats, and now its people were being slaughtered in turn. The hunters were gone. The hunted became the prey. The church had claimed to be cleansing the world of evil. Cats, Pope Gregory declared, were the devil's accomplices to be burned, butchered, erased from Christian lands. But in striking down the animals that once stalked shadows and kept vermin at bay, the shepherds of souls opened the gate to a greater beast, plague itself. What began as a holy war on Satan's pets turned inward, transforming into a war on humanity itself. Cities suffocated, not under demons, but under mountains of their own dead. What was meant to save Christian Europe damned it instead. The irony was unbearable. Sermons had thundered that the black cat carried witchcraft in its fur, but it was the rat, bloated, lice-ridden, crawling with fleas, that carried true death. The supposed army of Satan was nothing more than purring creatures, exterminated in fire and laughter, while the real enemy multiplied in the shadows unchecked. Every church bell that tolled for the dying might as well have been a dirge for Gregory's decree. Superstition, dressed in holy robes, had sharpened the scythe of the Black Death. A single papal bull, ink on parchment, had become the silent executioner of millions. Europe bled not because of witches or devils, but because of fear. Fear made flesh, fear sanctified, fear obeyed without question. And in that fear, humanity dug its own grave. The plague eventually burned itself out, but the curse Gregory, axe laid upon cats, never truly died. Long after the carts of corpses had stopped rolling, Europe still hissed at the sight of a black silhouette in the night. Cats, once guardians of granaries and silent hunters of rats, became permanent outcasts, walking shadows branded with the mark of the devil. When the witch trials came, the old hatred was rekindled. Women accused of consorting with demons were said to keep cats as familiars. Entire villages gathered to watch, not only the burning of a supposed witch, but the shrieks of the animals tied to her, claws thrashing, fur catching fire, their bodies twisting in agony beside their mistresses. Innocent creatures, slaughtered as if their blood carried Satan's signature. Superstition carved its mark deep. For centuries, a black cat slipping across your path meant disaster, sickness, death, damnation. It was not reason that taught this fear, but the echo of a pope's decree, whispered down generations. Gregory's curse lingered like smoke, staining folklore, twisting culture, embedding itself in the bones of Europe. Even now, in the modern age, that shadow remains. A black cat on Halloween, a symbol of witches and curses, an omen of doom. The Middle Ages still breathe through the fur of an animal that never asked for its damnation. And all of it, every burned body, every plague pit, every lingering superstition, began with one decree from one man in white robes. The Pope silenced the purr and unleashed the scream. From the smoke of burning cats rose a tide of rats, and behind them the Black Death. Half of Europe buried in plague pits, all because fear held the throne. Fear killed more than any sword. History is dark, and we must remember it.